Welcome back to the paper self-energy audit and completing thereof. We're going to start at section 13, this apartment unit heating, ventilation, air conditioning. The question is, does each apartment unit have their own heating, ventilation, and air conditioning units? Heating and or cooling, split units, through wall, PTACs, VTACs, etc. So here, what it's asking is if the heating and cooling is generated at each unit. So does it have its own condensing unit, its own furnace, and it's not supplemented by a central system, which were the questions earlier. If you indicated that there was yes to either a heating or cooling central system, the likelihood is you would answer no here, even though there's actually a fan unit or a fin tube radiator system that's actually delivering the heating and cooling. But if it's from a central system, the answer would be no here. But if your unit, which is the most part apartment units or housing dwelling units, have their own heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So you'd indicate whether it does or doesn't. If you answer no, go to section 15. So in section 14, what is the average typical age of the systems? Now, as in the central system, it was one system or several systems you're looking at. In the case of multiple systems, we want to know the general age of the majority of them, not just the individual one. We know that you may have new units at a part of the apartment unit, the HVAC systems that might be new, but we want to know the general age. So let's say you had several that were 1 to 5 years old, but the majority of them were 11 to 20, you'd select 11 to 20. You'd indicate what the general, typical, or average condition of the majority of those units, not the exception of the new ones that we were talking about, and you'd indicate what they are. If you do have cooling, we want to know what the typical cooling tonnage is on that AC unit. If you're not sure, then don't fill it in. If you do have cooling, what we do want to know is what type of refrigerant is actually being used. R22 is the most common today. If you have much newer systems, R410A is fairly recent, but you may or may not have those. R12 is a legacy refrigerant. There is a possibility you have R12, but it's quite rare. So if you know, indicate it. Otherwise, you put I don't know. The next section, 15, HVAC rooftop units. I'm going to describe a rooftop package unit real quickly. This is typically, you'll see them on top of strip malls and apartment buildings or other types of areas, and they're big boxes on top of the rooftop. When you say packaged units, rooftop package unit means that everything's packaged together. The heating and or the cooling, the fan unit, and everything is all in one unit in separate compartments within that box. That's a rooftop packaged unit. So if you have any of those, not to be confused with an air handling unit or makeup air unit, which we'll cover right after this, you'd indicate yes, and if you indicate no, go to section 17. Section 16 is do you have direct digital controls with those? You'd indicate yes or no. Other than the set point, like earlier, we just don't want a specific set point control system. We're trying to understand whether or not this system is controlled by an automation system of some type, direct digital control. Does the unit have heating? Let's assume yes, and we'll assume yes for cooling. If you put no for cooling, you can skip question 4, which is the tonnage. But if you have cooling in the rooftop packaged unit, indicate what that cooling tonnage is and the type of refrigerant. We'll assume R22, but if you have R410 indicated, or like the older R12, if you're not sure, indicate I don't know. Now, air handling unit is a little unlike the rooftop unit, which is totally packaged. It is just the fan unit on the roof typically, or on the side of a building. And if it needs to have supplemental heat or cooling, it's not part of that piece of equipment. It's usually inline or inductor later on in the actual air distribution system. Air handling units or makeup air units are actually very common in apartment buildings where you have common areas that need fresh air ventilation to meet those requirements of the indoor air quality. So if you have air handling units, indicate whether you have them. If not, you go to section 19. Next question, section 18 wants to know whether there are direct digital controls. You'd indicate whether there are. Whether that unit has heating, you'd indicate yes or no. or cooling. You'd indicate yes or no, and if you have cooling, we'd want to know what the tonnage is and the refrigerant type. We're now finished with the rooftop unit. We're now to building envelope, which is the next section. And thank you very much for attending this section.